All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another podcast of Young, Not Dumb, Not Broke. Today we have a really special guest sitting with us today who's a registered psychologist with a master's and PhD in clinical psychology, specializing in trauma. Today we have Dr. Jenny Dawson, a dear friend of mine, on the podcast. Let's welcome Dr. Jenny Dawson. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you, Jenny. Lovely to have you. Now, could you just explain to everyone what your job entails and what area of psychology you specialise in?
It's shifted over the years. It started mostly in trauma, and then that took me to work overseas in Congo, Palestine, Northern Uganda, Haiti, a range of other countries. Now I work predominantly with neurodivergent kids and adolescents and adults. Mostly because they seem to be the most traumatised in our country. So nowadays in Australia I work predominantly with neurodivergent.
And what does neurodivergent mean exactly?
It mostly means minority.
Okay.
So neurotypical is your typical, way the brain works. And a smaller group we call neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. When I work in remote tribes overseas, the neurodivergent here would be neurotypical over there because most of them think like the neurodivergent here. So if I took them over to, say, Congo, they would be neurotypical. And the neurotypical here would be neurodivergent over there. So it just means really the minority group.
Yeah, okay. Right, interesting. And in terms of the traumas, is that trauma in general? Like anyone who's experienced a significant event in their life that's impacted them? Or what does it mean exactly?
Trauma's thrown around pretty loosely in the West. Like, I hear things like, can't get a car spot, it was so traumatic. I've been driving around like for hours at Castle Hill Towers. Like,
yeah.
Life's really hard.
Trauma is meant to be used specifically for a life-threatening event. Either your life has been threatened or you've witnessed someone else's life being threatened.
Would you say great loss is also traumatic? Like someone who's suffered great loss?
Well, great loss in terms of if someone died. Yeah. But stressful events is not really considered a trauma. Trauma is specific to a life-threatening event witnessed or experienced. Right. Because it engages the survival mechanisms. Okay. So other life events don't necessarily engage survival mechanisms. Right. Which is a very, I'm going to die right now. And then the bottom brain takes over. Yeah. The only caveat to that would be children. If you're traumatized at a certain developmental age, then you can be traumatized by not life-threatening events, but because they are life-threatening events. So if you're very young and parents neglect you or are aggressive, then you can't look after yourself. Yeah. So it would be a life-threatening event at a certain age, just not to have a protective, parent who looks after you.
In terms of the comment you made about not finding a car spot, do you think over time as humans become less exposed to traumatic events that potentially the reptilian brain can be rewired to make small events have the same reaction as a life-threatening event?
That's a very big question.
It is, yeah.
I believe the brain has evolved. When people are given things that require no effort, then the brain has evolved to be more self-absorbed. So where, say if I work in very remote tribes, they take all the data in from around them because they have to find food and water. They work together because if they don't have each other, they can't survive. Where here, if the more privileged you are, the more you base your decisions on your feelings rather than facts.
Yeah, wow.
So I do believe the brain has adapted over time and perhaps not in a good way.
Right, okay.
We know from a lot of the wisdom literature that trauma actually either it breaks you or it makes you stronger, more resilient and wiser. And I think that's because it strips back a lot of things in the brain because you actually had to survive something, and people often like readjust in a dramatic way. Yeah. and I think in a healthier way to consider others and what is actually meaningful.
Yeah.
And if you look even at like the floods we've had, major fires, most people sort of, even if they're powerful, very rich, will look at, whoa, you know, it's the ones I love that I thought I was going to lose. That's the most important. Some just go back to living their life the way it was. But, I think the brain has changed.
Yeah.
And what is a tragedy to people here perhaps really isn't a tragedy.
Yeah, well, it comes down to this perspective, I guess, as well. I guess that's what we're talking about here, perspective of life. It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about that this morning as I was getting ready about the number of people who actually have access to clean water around the world, because I was worrying about something silly. And I'm like, come on, Stephen, bring it back. Like, life's not that bad.
No, a lot of people like walk. Like some of the women I work with would have walked like 2 hours in the morning there, 2 hours back, you know, just for water.
2 hours?
2 hours, yeah, to get fresh water. And in a drought, they might go further afield. So, yeah, if we turn on a tap.
Yeah.
I live off the grid now, and so I've got a water tank and like have a very limited supply of water. So it's actually made me rethink a lot of things. You know, you use water from the sink to water your plants, and like when people come and just turn the tap on and just let it keep running, like you get a bit anxious. Like, but imagine, if all you have is a couple of buckets and water is limited to what you can carry back.
So when you were overseas, was that with your company that you were the co-founder or CEO of, Trauma-Aid International?
Yeah, so that was with Trauma-Aid International.
Yeah, okay. Well, how did that come about?
Oh, that's a long story. I'll try and give a brief version.
Summarise that one.
That's a really big story. I was doing a PhD, my master's PhD at the time, and I was looking at neurotransmitter function in trauma. So it was operating on rat brains, which some people are offended by, but the rats were treated kinder than the people I work with overseas. They were given warming blankets, anesthesia.
Yeah, wow.
Like they were treated very kindly, which people overseas aren't treated that way. But I was looking at neurotransmitter function following stress, and my lab was flooded. My computer caught fire. Both my supervisors left. So I was sort of left with a PhD half done and was going to quit. And then I got a call from someone saying, I heard you talk about your community-based trauma model. We're going to Africa. Would you come and do some teaching? So I went over and did some teaching, and a couple of, if I cry, just ignore it, brings back a lot of memories. Couple of Congolese chiefs who had travelled through war zones for 2 weeks to get to my lecture, came up to me and said, will you come to our village? You're the first person who's made any sense as to what is happening to our children and women and people.
Wow.
So I struck a deal with them that if they would, I guess, teach me, like if I could learn from them about how they survive such horrendous events. And these two people had travelled through a war zone where up to 11 million civilians had died. They got a canoe down the Congo River, got piled on the back of a truck, then walked across the border into Uganda for this. Wow. So I said, if you teach me how you're so resilient when we have very little sort of drama in Australia and people are not as resilient, I'll come and teach your people. So we did a trade on knowledge, and it just went from there. It's like I taught in one village, and then another village asked, and then the Monuc police asked would I come and train their police, and then the military came and asked would I train them. So it just sort of leapfrogged from that. And then some girlfriends in Australia said, oh, look, we want to help you. So we started the company, and then people sort of funded the projects over there. So we built a school, we built agricultural fields, put in a medical clinic, started microcredit. So it just sort of organically grew. It wasn't like an idea I had. It came
Wow.
from a little disaster like halfway through my PhD,
Yeah.
and it just, transformed. So I ended up switching my PhD using the model I'd developed on community healing and actually putting it into practice overseas. So in a way, it was like a blessing that everything burnt down and got flooded.
Well, you're meant to be there. You're meant to,
was a
to be in the
calling.
Congo. So,
Yep.
so these, did you say they were warlords?
Chiefs, the
Chiefs,
chiefs.
okay.
Like chief, they still live in tribes.
So they noticed a big enough issue within their community
Yep.
that they travelled that entire distance to come and
Yeah.
see you.
Risked their life to get there.
Wow.
And I was so overwhelmed when I was there. I was standing there thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I'm just this sort of little woman from Australia, like teaching all these people who have lived through like horrendous things. What have I got to say? And this little Congolese man came up and he said, I can see you're anxious. And he said, but this isn't about you. And now I'll cry. He said, this isn't about you. This is about us. Like
Yeah.
for 10 years, we've been like killed, tortured, like just villages burnt down, massacres. And he said, we've been praying for 10 years for someone to come and explain why our women miscarriage, why our children collapse, why people dig holes in preference to living above ground. So he said, this isn't about you, this is about us. We were faithful, come. So it's
Wow.
like, how do you say no to that? So then I had to come back to Australia and talk to my two sons and say, you know, they were both in high school at the time. Do I have your permission to go back to a war zone? You know, literally had the conversation. They, amazing young men, said, we've benefited from you, so go and help. So we had to sign wills and sort out things. And
Wow.
I headed off to the jungle.
So you had no self-preservation with this. You were just like, I need to help these people.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I had a choice. It's
Yeah.
like if I paid my own way through uni, but still, like we live in a privileged country where, you know, if you don't have money, you can get a student loan, which I did. Got a student loan, you know, you can get subsidies from the government. And I felt that if I'd had this luxury of studying and was doing a PhD in trauma, it was a little bit hypocritical to not apply it in the most traumatized nation on earth.
Wow.
So it was like, I really didn't feel like I had a choice.
Yeah. Wow.
And when this guy was saying, it's not about you, it's about us, we were faithful, it was like, I got to trust that, you know. And it, like, who gets, like, so many PhDs are done just to get the title, and this book is shoved in the library, no one reads it, no one does it.
Correct.
To actually go out into a war zone and apply the model and see people recover from their trauma, rebuild their village, you know, move on with life in such a positive way is like, that's a gift I will never, ever
Wow.
forget.
It's amazing.
Would I do it again if I'd known everything I would have gone through? Probably not. But I don't for a day regret that I listened to that man and took up the offer and went back.
Wow. Did you know this man at all beforehand, or did anyone else know him? Or
No, it was I don't even know who did it now. An Australian group here of counsellors were invited to go across. They had contacts. So I was just asked to go because they'd heard I had a community-based model, and they said we teach individualistic counselling, so we should at least bring someone who sort of has a more like African style model. So and they put out their network, so it was just whoever through the networks in Africa wanted to come came. So I didn't know who would turn up.
so when you flew back over, was it to Congo, or where'd you fly to?
The first trip I did was
Yeah.
to northern Uganda,
Okay.
up on the border of Sudan, up where Joseph Kony was. He was still, when I first went, he was still up in the bush up there.
Yeah. What year was that?
2004, I
Yeah,
think,
wow.
was the first trip I did over.
Yeah.
And he was still out there.
That wasn't the same Coney as when it was like Coney 2012. Remember how there was that big Facebook campaign about?
Yep,
Was that
that's
the
the same
same
Joseph
Coney? Yeah,
Coney.
wow.
Yep. He would, it's long history, you know, it starts with colonization, and they were warriors. And then when they handed things over, they didn't have a job anymore. So they kept being militia, but they would kidnap kids. So at that point I was working with some of the kids who'd been kidnapped, the child soldiers. Literally they'd go into a village, kidnap these kids, make them kill their parents. And then they would train them to be soldiers. So when they were rescued, they were severely traumatised. So I was up in northern Uganda helping with the kids up there.
How much time do you have to spend with the child to help them through that trauma? Because that's not an overnight process.
No, definitely not. If the village is still intact, it's surprisingly easy. So it's teaching them to understand what trauma is, what their symptoms are. And then if they're in a village, you know, where there's emotional, spiritual, social support, I would then provide the physical, like if they didn't have food or we needed to provide them with tools. If we rebuilt the village around those kids, then they would eventually heal.
Wow.
Here it's a lot harder. It would take a lot longer.
Is that because there's probably a lot less impact on those communities? So the less amount of impact on like social community like ours, you're able to simplify the process? Is that or is there certain activities that create happiness where it's a team spirit, like where they all work together? Like how does it work?
They still have community over there. All of the research that I did, basically a lot of these, not in a city in Africa, it's worse than here. You get the worst of tribalism and capitalism. But in remote villages where I prefer to work, they still have community. They still look out for each other.
Correct.
It's like an us,
Yeah.
you know. So the adults in that, or the remaining adults, because there's always like massacres, it just obliterates. Like everything is obliterated. So we're rebuilding from scratch. But what I can do over there that I can't do here is it would be, okay, what used to bring the village together? And it would be tribal food, tribal dances. So I would buy bongo drums. We'd provide local food, not aid
Remember
food.
you told me about that when the tribes were doing different food competitions and stuff.
Different food competitions and stuff.
Yeah.
So if we rebuilt what used to bring the village together, then the village would come back together, and based on those memories would then like reband together and then rebuild.
That's incredible.
Yeah, because I was training. So the first training was with, say, local women, helping them manage their trauma, and then like they got it and they would go and help the children. And it's just different there. Is you don't have piles of paperwork. So if I give microcredit, the women go out and start a business. The police I worked with acted as fathers for the orphans. Some local women built a school. The chief gave land. The men carried bricks. So I've got this gorgeous photo of the school where the men and the children were carrying bricks. Like, I don't know, it took them ages to walk the bricks, and then built the school, and then people would come volunteer. And then we had fields of food that would feed the village and the kids then. And people took the orphans into their homes if we gave them microcredit. So it's that community spirit makes it very easy to rebuild a structure. And if you rebuild connections with land, animals and people, then they begin to heal naturally.
Wow, that's incredible.
Or putting them in a happy environment where they feel like everyone's connected.
Yeah.
Whereas these days at 6:59 in the morning, if your neighbour turns the lawnmower on, you're yelling over the fence saying, "Shut up!"
Yep.
You
That
know,
sounds like something Josh would do.
It's something.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
find
exactly
that
right.
extraordinary that
Yeah.
that those social changes within the community, well, not changes, but bringing them back to their normal, has such an impact on their mental health.
Yeah. There's a lot of good research out there that shows that mental health issues are from disconnection. You know, so we're disconnected nowadays from land, animals, and people. And the healthiest people, like on all our Western measures I've ever found, are remote tribes.
Wow.
Because they're still connected to land, animals, and people. So you rebuild those connections and they're back in a state of, you know, togetherness and health.
Yeah,
In the
wow.
remote villages, it's very rare that I find personality disorders, schizophrenia, you know, like the serious mental illness we get here is unheard of.
Really?
Yeah, in the remote tribes. When I go in, it's post-trauma, so it's post-war. You know, they're anxious then secondary to their trauma symptoms. But again, once we treat that, they're fine. Like, so...
There's probably not a lot of outside factors that are confusing that healing process.
Yeah, well,
Like
that's what I'm thinking.
someone
yeah.
like us in our busy society that has all of this confusion, 30,000 thoughts a day at our hand tips. You know, if you were to remove 29,000 of them
You're right.
and be in nature, in a community spirit, without
Exercising.
the Kardashians telling me that they've got a flat tire or something like that. I don't know. Or they couldn't get the colour of their nails done the way they wanted to.
Yeah.
You remove all the stresses, the fake stresses I call
Yeah, the
them,
fake stress.
and have this massive disconnection in the middle, life would you'd be able to probably heal a lot better.
I think you're right. I think you're
Mentally,
right, yeah.
like I think your brain would be much cleaner. You're filtering out all the shit.
Yeah, that's right.
And you've got this like really nice purity of just going, okay, well the things in front of me are actually not too bad. I need to just do A, B, and C, and if I can do A, B, and C, then I think I can overcome this.
I think you're right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
You know, teams always work better together.
Yeah.
Communities work better together. As soon as you start singling people out and then load 30,000 thoughts a day onto them,
They're overwhelmed.
and they can't make decisions.
And if you have a problem here, it's sort of your problem.
Yeah.
And it's stressful, you know. Over there, individualism isn't even a concept.
Really?
It's an us. Yeah. It's a tribe. So they have a tribal identity. So I could always tell which tribe a person was from based on their values, beliefs, the way they live in the world.
Wow.
Is it also the way they mark themselves as well? Like different tribes have different sort of cultural tattoos
and
or something
ancestrally,
like that?
yeah, they would mark themselves differently. Now,
Different attire, different jewelry, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But they're highly individualistic, so you don't tell anyone what to do. Everyone offers their unique gifting as long as it's beneficial to the whole.
Wow.
So I found them to be more individualistic, even though they had a group identity, where here people are always raving about, you know, I'm an individual, I can think what I want, I can do what I want, but they dress the same, they do their hair the same. They even now are literally putting Botox in and they look the same.
Yeah.
You know, so they claim individuality here, but they really aren't. They're looking like a group of the same people.
Yeah, correct.
So I think we're losing an awful lot by losing community.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these days you can't even pay someone to get a community spirit in them.
No.
Like at the end of the day, like, you know, we all have teams, we all have businesses, and you know, one person is part of the team. You can't even pay them to act like a team member.
Yeah.
Over there's no money involved in what's going on. Their trade is probably food and water and building and help. That's probably their currency, I would believe.
It's entirely different. They live connected to nature. They live connected to land, animals, people. They're respectful of all. You know, it's like in every element is connected, so every decision they make is serious. Like the way that you treat this insect might affect the agriculture. The way you do this might run off into the river and affect the water source. So they don't rush into decisions. Like it's just it's a beautiful way of life. They kill an animal, but where we sort of kill 1,000 cows and throw away a lot of rubbish is they will kill one animal for the village and use every element of that animal out of respect for taking a life. So they'll sing a song and say like how grateful they are that you sacrificed your life for us, and then will not waste a portion of it. So they'll use the organs for water vessels, and they'll use this and this and this.
Really?
And white people will sort of come in and go, oh, how disgusting, without any sort of understanding that they use every portion so you don't waste a life.
Yeah.
So the respect that is shown to the land, animals and people, I think is what makes them so healthy. Like I always come back out of a war zone healthier than when I went in.
Yeah, wow.
And I'll often come home and people will say, wow, like you look good. And it's like, yeah, I've been sort of back in my other homeland.
Being connected.
Yeah.
Connected to Earth. And, think about the food that they're eating is like ridiculously nutrient dense, clean. There's no additives. There's no bleach salts. There's no metals. There's nothing. Like you're eating literally from the land in its best possible form. There's no commercial style businesses around them pumping out stuff out of a factory. Then you have a situation where vegans are saying that that's the number one thing is to go vegan, but all their food has been processed up to 30 times before it gets into a packet.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's the healthiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, it goes through how many metal tubes to get to your packet. So
Yeah,
I can completely agree that coming back from a place like that, you'd actually feel quite cleansed in a lot of ways.
And I think one of the most healing things is, I drink a lot more water over there. You're outdoors teaching, you're not indoors, so there's no air conditioning. But when I arrive, they'll always say, like in their language, something that means, Jenny, I see you, which means I see you as an individual. And they would know me, I think, far better than nearly everyone here outside of my sons. Because they take the time before you do any any action within the village, they want to know you. So they sit down and talk to you, they get to know you. And that's sort of every human being's, I think, deepest want is to be known and to know, to be understood. So they would know me different to the person beside me, where here you're putting categories.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, you're grey hair. Oh, you're a psychologist. Oh, you're this. And I find people make huge assumptions here about me. And it's just it feels off because it's like, that isn't even me. Where I can land in a village and within an hour, I feel completely embraced and known for who I am.
Wow.
And accepted. And there's no crap. Is if you do something wrong, everyone just speaks truth. If you do something wrong, they'll call you on it.
Yeah, wow.
If I do something culturally inappropriate, it's just don't do that. That's offensive because of blah, blah, blah. Thanks. Okay, what should I do? If you say that here, you might wound someone's feelings.
Correct.
And
and now they have a traumatic experience.
That they
need to go seek clinical help.
HR is called in.
HR.
So we're losing the element.
Resignation letters firing.
Yeah. I actually had a client. It was the most bizarre thing. I thought, now we're really screwed. Is he pulled up an error in the company that had meant they lost $50,000. He was autistic, so for him it was just, this is fact. And he got in trouble and brought in a memo where it said, you made your boss feel, not good because you pointed out this mistake. In future, you are not to point out any mistakes. And I thought, okay, now we're screwed. If someone's feelings dominate over actual truth and errors,
correct,
then that can only end in disaster.
No, and that's what that's what our society is now built on. It's just about, you can't say certain things or certain truths. Even some people could even find controversial You know, you're saying that people over there heal faster than people here. And it's because of our way of life. Some people would find that offensive. They'd be like, well, no, I'm strong. I can heal myself.
Yep. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to trauma, I can't speak of anything else.
Yeah, correct.
It's the one thing that you need community around you, you know, like to heal. You can't actually heal trauma on your own. And that's evident in the soldiers I work with. They leave their band of brothers and come back here, and they're often alone.
Yeah.
They don't heal. Suicides through the roof, particularly in America in the veterans. But a lot of it's because they're separated. They land home, go back to their families, which are sort of not as much family as the guys they worked with in the field, and trying to heal themselves doesn't work.
I've never thought about it like this before. That's incredible.
You need community.
Well, it's environment too. Like you're changing the environment. Like, you know, let's pretend with an animal. That's probably the best thing to go with an animal. If I was to go home, pick up my dog, take him out of his environment, put him in a completely different one, different temperature, different love, different affection, different grass, different everything, I'd expect some traumatic experience to happen to him. He'd be out of whack. So apply that to a human.
Yeah.
Be a very similar
He'd be
thing.
out of whack. He wouldn't be traumatized, but he'd be out of whack.
But it'd take a little while for him to adjust.
Yeah.
But if he didn't have the right love and support around him to help him guide him through this next experience, he may be traumatized.
Well, yeah, I still wouldn't say trauma needs to be a life threat.
Yeah.
Definitely an adjustment.
Correct.
But what happens with these soldiers without that environment around them, all of their war memories of their buddies being blown up, of being shot at, they come back.
Yeah.
How long did you spend in Africa helping different communities?
Close to 20 years, but not like I would only go for 4 to 6 weeks at a time.
Yep.
So usually 3 times a year I'd go for 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
So I would go and do the training of the elders and the people in the village, and then leave them to do the work, and I'd come back and earn some money and then go back, see where they're at, and then we'd do the next stage, which might be microcredit, building something, building a school, like whatever the village thought was the next step. And then I'd come back, and then I'd go back again.
How did the microcredit get started?
Basically, like I'd just sit down and talk in the village, what would help?
Yeah.
And they went, well, we need food, we need provision. If you give us $25, then we can start a business.
Yeah.
So it was always, I never implemented anything that wasn't sort of a solution offered by the village, because things that would cost $1 million going through an aid agency were like $25,000, you know, because the local people don't need as much. So for the microcredit, say the women would take $25, walk across the border to Rwanda, buy tomatoes, come back over, sell them with a little bit of extra profit. They'd go back and buy more tomatoes.
Wow.
And they would just keep growing. So each woman started their own like business. But in the end, down in Bukavu where I worked, I think there was maybe 400 women we set up initially. And then without giving them any more than that $25, they were then supporting all of their grandchildren in school with clothing and food, because their parents had all been massacred in the post-Rwanda when the Interahamwe came into Congo. They kept killing. So almost a whole generation were wiped out. But through that $25, but they don't have to pay. Like you start a business here, you've got to pay your registration, pay tax, pay this, pay that. But there, they literally, you give it to them and they walk over and like get the business going.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was their idea. And up in northern Uganda, we've still got the microcredit groups going up there.
Because I can't think of his name right now. You might know the. I don't think it was the founder of microcredit, but the guy who was quite influential in that space.
From India.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
He did amazing work to start with, but all of those models take interest.
Yeah. Oh, they do, don't they?
So
yes.
the people end up in some models more burdened.
Oh, okay.
Because they then owe interest to the group. where what we did was there was a microcredit group. Say if there's 10 women,
Yeah.
they'd all be given $25 each. They'd make money and then they'd put a portion back into the kitty. And so the interest went back to the group, and then the group added another member when they had enough money.
Oh, wow.
And then at the end of a year, one person could borrow all of the money that had gone into the kitty, and they would buy like a push bike or
Wow.
some concrete to put on their, hut
Yeah.
and stuff. So that way the money was circulating around the group
Wow.
rather than coming back out to an external.
Well, you are right. There was
bank or
interest
something.
charged in that model. Yeah. I can't
Yeah.
think of it. He didn't win a Nobel Prize for that as well.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Controversial one.
Yeah.
But yeah, is that model as time went on, like everything is, the bigger things grow,
Yeah.
the more infrastructure, the more admin, the more money is taken out.
Yeah.
So I'd preferred to just stay on a grassroots. Means it perhaps doesn't go as far, but the little ripple effects,
Correct.
they're all still going through. None of the projects were affected,
Wow.
even though I couldn't get over there. They just kept going on their own.
Wow. And you said you built a school over there?
I worked with a local woman who built the school.
Wow.
So we provided resources, but the chief provided the land. Like I said, the men made the bricks. The police acted as the fathers. The local villagers took in the orphans.
Wow.
So that was a group of some of the most horrific stuff I heard. There was like hundreds of orphans living at the airport, naked, living under plastic bags. They were mute, like horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. Like I had this little boy on my lap, and literally if I lifted his hand, he'd leave it there. I'd push it down, he'd leave it there. He just stared just like no one was home. He was 4. They'd seen their parents, warning, this is fairly horrific. They'd seen their parents killed, skinned, cooked and eaten in front of them. Outside counsellors had come in and got them to draw some pictures, which just re-traumatised them even more. They'd put pictures up around so kids who actually didn't see what happened could now see what happened. So they were the most traumatised kids I'd come across. I think local woman there, she is the one behind all this. It was her idea, her impetus. We just put in the money. And I went and did the trauma training with all the school teachers. I went back, I think 2 or 3 years later, and those kids were speaking 3 languages.
Wow.
They spoke
Jeez.
English, Swahili, French. I took friends from here who built a playground in the school. They were running up and down the playground, going down the slippery dip. So when
There's some amazing benefits here.
when people here complain, like I just say, pull your finger out and get it together, is you can get through this. If those kids, who see their parents like that happen, and they're in they had distended bellies, malnutrition, and then I go back and that was the love of the village and the love of the people. I've got the most incredible footage of the police playing a soccer game with the orphans, and the orphans genuinely won, and it was just like the biggest celebration ever. But for me, I would sit and cry with joy. It was just like, you said, like, did you think about going? It was like I felt I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
It's like, had I not gone, these kids would be dead. Quite literally, hundreds of thousands of people would be dead. And I don't take credit for it. It was this little man who said, this is about us. We've prayed for you to come. They did all the, they had the ideas, they had the impetus, they did the hard work. I just took the training and some resources from here, very little resources, funded by some businessmen, and they rebuilt. So very few things faze me here. It's like, I think if they can get through that and these kids are healthy, happy, 5 years ago, we had our first orphan come back into the school as a teacher. You know,
Wow, that's awesome.
so it's as hard as it's been. I've been kidnapped, shot at, earthquakes. You know, a bazooka could go off near my little compound. I still think overall it's the most amazing experience I've ever had.
Wow.
More good than bad.
You just slipped something in there. Kidnapped. Are we able to go into that or?
Yeah, it was. That's a funny story. Is
Funny one. Hey, I got kidnapped. It's pretty funny though. Listen to this story. Oh.
I think I was in shock. I usually travel to Congo, particularly on my own. I've travelled with a team of builders, and I've travelled with another team. But mostly I travel alone. It's safer. The local people know the area. They look out for me. I'm not a threat, just being a single white woman. This time I had a film crew approach me and ask could they tag along and film, and they would give some money to the projects. So I thought, all right, if the local people benefit, sure, I'll do that, which they didn't end up giving money, by the way. But I said to them, you can come as long as you listen to me. We're not in Australia. So if I say put your cameras away, put your cameras away. And of course, you know, like sometimes being an older single woman of very short stature is people write you off. Yeah. And so they wouldn't listen to me. And so we'd gone up into the hills up in Congo where the pygmies were. I had a meeting with some pygmies up there who'd been driven out of their forest. And then coming back down, the truck broke down. So we had to walk through this trail down to a little town. And one of the guys pulled his camera out, and the local sort of security police for the president of Congo was there. And they thought that they were the CIA taking photos in preparation for the president to come, and they were going to kill him, because in the old days, like, there had been rumours that the CIA had killed their president, which is now just, it's been confirmed. That's what happened.
Really?
Yeah, I forget his name, but you can look it up on YouTube. A local guy who was for the people was taken and killed. So they thought that was that's why we were there, because there were 3 sort of white guys, and my translator, Willie, says, like, he pulled over some bikes and he was like, jump on the bike. And it's like, why? And he goes, get on the bike. So I was like, okay. So jumped on the back of the bike, and I was having fun. It's like, I couldn't believe it. It's like we were speeding through the jungle. I'm on the back of this little motorbike, like, just going, this is awesome, look at this. And then there was a roadblock, and Willie said to me, we're fleeing because, like, the police are out for us. So a couple of the local guys had got arrested and put in a pit overnight. We were taken up into the bush, into this little shack, and I wouldn't give them my passport. They kept asking for passports and, like, questioning us. And one of the guys we'd bought, I was worried he was going to go crazy because he was a bit unstable, and that would have done us in. But, you know, we just sat there really calm and talked it through, and ended up giving them, they said, give us some sugar. So I gave them 30 US each. And then they took us into town, and we had to meet with the local mayor, and unfortunately we got the locals in trouble. We had to explain ourselves. And then the pygmies then put all of our suitcases and everything on their heads and walked them down out of the forest where the truck had broken down. So It was quite a bizarre experience.
Wow.
But it sort of highlights, there's a lot of people go into these places. The Congo bush looks very much like Australian bush, which these guys, it made them feel safe. It's like the bush looked just like here. Mm. But up in the hills where we'd been, there was militia everywhere with machine guns, and because the president was coming in, there were also secret police everywhere.
Wow.
looking out for it. So yeah, that was my kidnapping. It could have been a whole lot worse, but
Yeah, definitely.
it wasn't. So I'm thankful for that.
Did you ever find yourself in direct danger, like someone trying to harm you directly for what you were doing for the communities?
Not so much what we were doing for the communities. Mostly that was valued because like the community itself owned the project.
Okay.
Like that safety is, you're not an outsider coming in.
Yeah.
Like it's the communities own the projects. So probably not from the work I did, just being in the wrong place. Like we had the car stopped and machine gun in the window. But again, like traveling with locals, they have their connections. And so I would never just go and take off on my own, but I always traveled with locals.
Mm-hmm.
So they got me out of trouble a few times.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say, I mean, I don't really know. At the time, you're just a bit in shock and get through it and move on.
Yeah, wow.
I'd probably say the most danger I had was I got sick from some bad water,
Oh, really?
like whatever that was once, but
Dysentery or something?
something like that. But I had some friends, the MAF pilots who used to fly me in. Fortunately, they were flying me out that day, so they had some medicine they'd bought from the States, so I fixed that up pretty quickly.
Wow. What's the, I guess, death rate for people drinking unclean water over there? Is it still high?
It would still be really high in remote places. Yeah.
How remote were these places that you were going to? Like from a city? Like how far would they be from a city?
Probably the most, like I'd say to my kids, I'm getting a big plane to Dubai, then a medium plane to Uganda, and then a 12-seater plane into Congo, then a 3-seater plane down to Bukavu, and then it was like a 3-hour car trip. So they were quite remote, some of the places we went to. But they're still on the fringe of the forest. You'd need days to trek into very remote.
Wow.
Proper adventure. Like, what, 3-4 planes, cars,
4
bikes,
planes and cars. It would take
bikes and
days.
Yeah.
To get
It's
there.
almost a 3-day, 4-day trip
4 days it would take
to get into
to my destination.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Do the militia make it out to these remote communities?
Do the militia
Like,
get to them?
Yeah, do they track it? Well, what's the benefit of tracking out that far for them?
Well,
What's
they're
their
in
goal?
hiding. So, I mean, it's complicated. There's so much tribal stuff. And as you know, Congo's got gold, diamonds, cobalt, whatever we put in our mobile phones.
I've just seen videos about that recently.
Yeah, you got the mines there where they use the children. So, like, there's a lot of reasons for the conflict. Down where I was, it was the Interahamwe following the Rwanda genocide, is that the problem was literally just pushed across the border into Congo. So they fled the Interahamwe after all the massacre and hid in the hills of Congo. So they would hide, like they would go deep to get away from being caught. And the strategy was, like in those remote villages, they would rape the women, then kill the men, rape the children, and then like shoe them, cut their tongues out, cut their ears, and they would run to the next village and like obviously in a highly traumatized state, tell everyone what had happened so that village would flee. And then they'd go to the next village and tell them what was coming so that village would flee. So they were able to clear a whole lot of land to come in and live in because of that strategy of, terrorize this village, and they would then run to the next one.
Why do the militia over there do that? Like, surely it's just not for a place to live. Are they just looking for someone to live? Or
It's resources.
Yeah.
They need food, water. Like, how do you live if you've been thrown out of your own country?
I guess so. Yeah.
How do you live? You need animals, agriculture, huts, tools. So, like, it's just that fight for resources, the most basic of human survival.
And
Wow.
here we fight for car spots.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
And those women, like that sounds horrific, but I was in Bukavu and the women who had fled, the most confronting scene I've ever had is I was taken to a room like to teach some women how to manage their nightmares, and you know they were collapsing. If they'd see a soldier in uniform, they'd collapse. And I walked into this room and they were just jam-packed in. It stank. There were women with bullet wounds, panga cuts, like no clothes. They had a handful of clothes. They would borrow. So one woman would go out and beg for money in clothing, come back and give that clothes to another woman who would go out and beg for money and come back. And I just walked in and like, it was harrowing just seeing like some of them, still had bullets, still cuts. And it's like, what the hell? But again, I just taught them what the trauma was, how to manage their symptoms, what happens if you're under threat. And like I used this, I converted my PhD to a picture book of a cat and a mouse. And I was showing them this picture of how if you sort of feel like a victim and you've got this predator, your brain alters and you can't sleep and you're distressed and you can't eat. And they were like, got it straight away. But the most surprising thing was a few of the women put up their hands and went, I'm a cat. And I went, okay, your husband's just been killed in front of you, your children's been raped, you've been raped, you've got cuts all over you. How are you a cat? Like, you're the victim. And they were like, no, we fled from our rural villages into the city here and landed on our relatives' doorsteps. And they've virtually got no food and can't hardly look after themselves, and now we've landed on their doorstep and are expecting them to provide for us.
Wow.
So I'm actually a cat to my family in the city. And then
Wow.
other women would go up, like this woman from the village went, oh, when I was in the village, I was the chief's wife. And, I thought I was pretty sort of special virtually in their cultural terms. And I would actually, sort of look down on you women, and I would take some of your stuff and supplies. So I was a cat to you. And so these women, which I have to say are the most abused of the abused of the abused, still have the insight to look at how they can be a cat to someone else.
Yeah, wow.
And so that whole language then became how they don't want to be a cat to someone else and make them feel like a mouse. So we bought them, a school in Australia gave me money for material. We bought rolls and rolls of material. They all had a wash. I got a couple of local tailors, made them all like a outfit. They all wanted the same material. And sorry, I'll cry again. I went back 2 years later. They all had their own businesses. They were looking after other children. They had their children in school. And they joined in the International Women's Day march through the town there to show that they were no longer cats.
Wow.
That they were independent women and they wore the dresses that we gave them.
Wow.
And like marched with their head held high, full of pride. So, yeah, I just think we complain way too much here. Is like those women had lost everything and they put themselves back together to be a positive force in the town rather than be dependent. They didn't want to be a cat, they said, so they were going to help other people and not be a burden on the town.
It's incredible.
So incredible, yeah. They didn't seek out aid. They didn't do anything.
Do you find people are more selfless over there compared to here, or are there still people in communities who want to be like entrepreneurs and run businesses?
I find, like, again, it's in a remote village, everyone is an entrepreneur.
Right.
Because they want to use their own gifts in a unique way for the good of the village.
Yeah, okay.
So it's the only limit is
Right.
You can do whatever you want as long as it benefits the village. And people celebrate that. Where here it's competition. If you're a great warrior there, people celebrate it because the village benefits.
Yeah.
Where here you would be torn down because of the competition. So, and I don't know that it's selfless. It's to survive, you need to work together as a whole for a common goal.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be an individual. If you're out in the jungle as an individual, you're not going to survive.
Wow.
So it's I don't know if it's selfless. It's just their way of life.
Yeah, wow.
And that way of life produces a mutual respect, like I said, for land animals and people. But it's beneficial to you because they realise that they can't live without the land. Like they'll say to me, if we don't look after the land, we've got no food, we'll die. If we don't look after the animals, then we've got no food, we'll die. If we don't have each other, then we can't fight off enemies, so we'll die. So it's that awareness that like we need to look after these resources to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Where here is I can say to kids, where does chicken come from? You know, like what's a chicken? You know, and they go like, well, chicken sort of out on the farm, and then you show them sort of chicken in the supermarket. It's like, no, that's not a chicken.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
So the disconnection we have now, you turn on the tap and use as much water as you want. You go to the supermarket and get food. It disconnects you from the process, you know, which then removes the respect because there's not that awareness that literally we'll be dead if we don't have these things.
Yeah, wow.
So today, obviously, you know, moving on from that really touching story, like I wish we would have a long time to talk about this stuff, but unfortunately we don't. So today you're practicing all day, every day. I know you're probably one of the busiest people I know, because every time I talk to you, you're back to back till late hours of the night and very early mornings. So right now, what would you say is the most reoccurring thing that you see that's coming past your eyes daily that you think that you have to continuously stay on top of? Or is there a particular demographic that you think that are probably your hardest ones to deal with, or what is the issues that you see today?
Post-pandemic, the most common issue is anxiety, and it's different for different people. Predominantly here, what dominates is power status image. People live by power status image. That's an individualistic culture. Yeah. So they're anxious if they're losing their power, their status or their image. School kids are anxious, particularly younger ones. They've spent years in lockdown and got used to a small environment with just family. So that, like you were talking about the dogs before, that it's a change in environment now. So many of them are struggling going back to school. They're anxious. Teachers are anxious because they have to worry about students' feelings. So they have no power really. So they're being abused constantly. So teachers are anxious. People are anxious over the mortgage, rate hikes, cost of living. Adolescents and young adults, I'd say, are anxious over war. Like they're losing motivation. It's like, what's the point? We'll never be able to buy a house. Like China will invade us. Like all the conspiracy theories and state of the world, like the environment is what's the point of having kids? The environment will be trashed. So they're bought into the really negative vibe. Yeah. And so I think anxiety across all demographics for different reasons, but they're anxious.
Is there one tip, and obviously, you know, people go and see you for your, you know, expertise, but if there was one tip, without giving everything away, that would help with anxiety, what would be that one tip? And I'm sure there's many.
It's a complicated one.
I'm sure there's many. Yeah, like no, for
Sleep
me,
more.
like for me, like I would, you know, for me to overcome anxiety, I would meditate. I would be able to be in a place where I can remove myself from those negative thoughts and just focus on the ones that I need to in front of me that promote positive actions. So that's for me. And I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't have a PhD. I don't do anything. But I've learnt within myself that, and you know, we've had many conversations over the years and many opportunities to sit down and chat as friends and just chat about this stuff. And I've been so grateful to learn so much from you and apply those things to myself and learn more about myself. so I don't suffer from anxiety.
Yeah.
I'm one of those chefs who doesn't need to go out and smoke a 7-minute cigarette in 34 seconds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or have to drink to try and find answers, or
Yeah.
do drugs to try and find solutions. I don't need any of that. All I need is myself and me to be in the right frame of mind so I can keep moving
Yeah.
forward. So, yeah, I know it's a hard question, but if you just had one, if you don't, I totally get it.
Let me give you a general response. Is anxiety is an anticipatory threat. So you only get anxiety when you anticipate a threat.
Right.
So for the power status image people, the threat is losing that. You know, for the kids who don't see a future, the threat is I don't have a future. So I would say it's identifying what the threat is and then trying to analyze that threat logically and truthfully.
Practically.
Practically as to whether it's really a threat.
I think we're so quick to jumble emotions and practicalities together.
Yeah, and it jumbles up. So if you, the most common one here would be, because most people hear a power status image, that's in the cities, that's what drives our culture. It would be identifying what's the threat, and then, well, is it really a threat? You know, what happens if I lose that? So if you remove the threat, you don't even have to treat anxiety. Anxiety is a natural response to a perceived threat.
Right.
So if you remove the threat, then the anxiety goes.
Or remove yourself from the thought of the threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remove yourself from the thought. And if there is an actual threat, you have to take practical action. Like if you're an anxious kid because your dad's violent, you can't make that kid not anxious. You try and deal with the dad who's violent, you know, remove them from danger. It's just, I guess here it's the dangers have become so many.
Yeah.
If you're in a jungle, it's a lion, it's the cobra, it's hunger. Here it's not being popular, you know, it's the finances, the food, the future, the unknown, you know, like you turn on the TV and it's just depressing.
Yeah.
So it's, I think the amount of perceived threats here is what's causing the anxiety to go through the roof. Yeah. But a lot of those threats I don't think are real. So if you sat down logically and went, okay, in my life, what is a threat? Okay, and then you go, what am I going to do to deal with it? I mean, that's what you're good at, Josh, is, you know, the pandemic comes, it's like, okay, bang, I've got to do this. I'm going to do takeaway. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It's finding a solution to the threat. But most people just act on the feeling, you know. It's like, oh, you know.
But I kind of look at everything like a challenge. So I don't look at everything like it's a huge problem, sorry. You know, at the moment we do have huge financial problems in society right now, but now I'm looking at the challenge. So I don't look at the issues or the threat or the anxiety of it all. I look at going, well, let's create a new challenge that I can try and conquer within myself to do what? You know, and everything is a perceived value or a subjective point of view. And by all means, there are many problems out in society that are affecting people right now. And they might be financial, they might be a relationship, they might be a job or whatever it is. And that's their subjective problems. And they all have the right to deal with their problems in the best way possible because it's theirs. They own those problems. But for me, I look at it as a challenge. I look at how can I overcome this and move forward in the best way possible without mixing my emotions and the practicalities of life together and making it a shitstorm. So, yeah, it's
been really interesting. How long do we have?
I think we probably need to wrap up because you've got more important people to say after this. You've probably got a couple minutes.
In about 10 minutes.
Well, okay.
We'll wrap it up in 5.
No, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Honestly, I've gotten so much out of this conversation. I really didn't think it would. I didn't give much expectation. I don't give expectation to things, but it was amazing. Honestly, like your stories and what you've seen and the perspective shift to what actually the world is like, not this, how most of the people in the world are actually living, rather than our, I guess, not fake reality, but a skewed reality of what's normal.
In many ways, yeah, it's very skewed. Is what I found, like going between all these cultures, backwards and forwards, they have incredible emotional and spiritual strength and resources, but very little like intellectual in terms of schools and physical resources. I come back here and we've got amazing intellectual and physical resources, but very little emotional and spiritual resources. So when tough times hit, people whinge, you know, or you know, like they have hard times. But I think if we could just act like, look at those women that I was telling you about. If we could just work together, I don't believe the world's as negative as what young people see it as.
No.
You know, is like go back over civilization. There's the Ice Age, there's wars, there's volcanoes. I don't believe it's as bad as what people think. If we could just work together for a common good, not someone's financial good.
Correct.
Like I want to be rich, so I'm going to bulldoze this or I'm going to do this. If we could work together for what is a common good, I do think the world can turn around. The pandemic cleaned the waters up. Animals propagated. You know, in Africa, the lions are having more babies. Here, the birds have gone crazy. So, you know, things can turn around. So I'm an eternal optimist after going through 20 years of war.
Oh, you would be. You would be. You mentioned spirituality. What is a spirituality like within those communities over there? I'm assuming they have quite a large sense of connection to their ancestors.
Yeah, so connection again to land, animals and people and ancestors.
Yeah.
So it is, people die, but it's such a different way of seeing things. Like I heard an Indigenous man in Australia say once, like, you white people are a bit funny, you think of heaven in the sky, which gives you permission to trash Earth because you think you're going to go somewhere else when you die, not here up in the sky.
Wow.
So you just trash here. But he said, we go back to the Earth when we die, so we therefore want to look after it and respect it.
Remember, we get buried in the earth.
Yeah.
A lot of us do.
Buried, yeah.
So
but they
makes
see
sense.
they become, one with the earth again.
Yeah.
So their purpose in life is to leave the earth in a better place when they die than when they were born. And I found that Indigenous culture here, I found that very much in tribes overseas.
Wow.
They have a purpose to leave the earth in a better place when they die than when they're born. And they still have a role when they die. So when someone dies, they become an ancestor, which is, it sounds like to some people spooky, but it means, say if you were, like they call them walking libraries, so their age is revered. The older you are, the more knowledge you have, the more experience you have. So when you are elderly, people come to you for advice, and when they die, that person's wisdom is still consulted as an ancestor. So it's really about not losing their knowledge.
Yeah, wow.
You know, they're not thinking a ghost is sitting amongst us.
No.
It's the ancestors' knowledge is here amongst us, and they sort of bring it on board. So the spirituality is very connected and cohesive.
I think it's incredible that two remote communities in other sides of the planet can have similar teachings and beliefs.
Yeah.
We're talking about very old tribal, ancestral.
I wrote a paper on West and African versus Western conceptualization of post-traumatic stress disorder, and the Africans had very similar knowledge, if not more advanced knowledge of trauma because of observation. So we do a lot of ours with statistical analysis, which, you know, you clean up the data and stuff. They sit amongst traumatized people for centuries gathering observational data. So their observations were very much on par with ours, except different terminology.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So we've lost a lot of knowledge by not considering them. When I went over there, I was told by certain people in the university, like, you're not going to learn anything from the savages over there. Why are you bothering going over there? And I learned pretty much everything that I sort of implement in my practice.
Wow.
You know, adding it to the Western psychology. But I think the depth I learnt from over there.
Wow.
You know, the pygmies, like, that were driven out of, I worked with some pygmies that were driven out of the forest. First time they'd ever seen the sky. some were having heart attacks and dying, like literally dropping dead because they've never seen the sky, because the canopy in the dense jungles is so, like, you can't see through it. But they had, talking to them, it's like, wow. So we had to put tarpaulins up between trees so that they felt safe. But they have herbal things for asthma, for infection. You know, they were healthy. They had all these herbal things that they use for like health issues.
Wow.
But instead of drawing the knowledge from them, they were driven out of the forests, you know, where they're now scattered all over the place because of whatever minerals are in the ground. And I just think we're just losing the centuries of knowledge by not being respectful.
That's incredible.
Of what can be known.
The ancestors' knowledge too.
Ancestors, because they could, we keep sort of coming up with something new where they're building on centuries of knowledge.
Correct.
And a forest doesn't change, technology changes, but a forest remains the same. So you just know more and more and more and more.
You're right. Yeah.
Over time.
Wow. That's incredible.
Well, man,
That's changed my perspective on a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, I think Jenny needs to go back and change her community, so
Yeah,
she needs to
correct.
get back to her practice. But
Yeah, I do need to get back to work.
you need to go. But no, thank you so much
Yeah,
for coming on today. It's been a really good insight.
It's been amazing.
I know we've spent many years, together and being with our friendship and whatnot. So it's always been a pleasure. And if any viewers, are needing help, there are plenty of help options out there. Lifeline, there are many helplines out there. So please reach out if you feel like you do need help, or you need someone like Jenny. Plenty of resources out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
You're
much.
Thank you for being on. And we finally made it happen. Brendan, thank you. Stephen, thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you so much.